And we are live. We should have you. I think we mentioned this before, but we need to do a jingle to open our shows with,
I love it.
kind of like a Laverne and Shirley opening.
Ooh,
Schlemiel, Schlemazel.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How you doing, Jason?
I'm doing awesome. By the way, one time I had to do a sales kickoff. To your point about a jingle,
Yeah.
the guy was like a jazz dude, and he was like, "I want every executive to have a walk on." And so I picked all hard rock crap, like what I listen to, and it killed the whole thing because he wanted it to be like Miles Davis, and I was like, "I want Radiohead."
That's all right.
There should be a thing of all the things I've ruined in tech.
Oh,
That should
I
be a
love
podcast.
that.
What Jay's ruined.
We can do one for each of us. It might be multi podcast episodes.
Years of content.
Yeah. Hey, so welcome all to the More Insights and Strategy IT Talk podcast. Jason Anderson is the resident expert, and I am Matt Kimball, just somebody that's hanging on for dear life. And we are here to talk all things IT. We're going to share some opinions. Don't take anything we say as advice around kind of how you should go about arranging or rearranging your investment portfolio. This is really just two nerds talking and having fun. And with that said, there is a bunch of stuff to talk about, Mr. Anderson. We got quite a bit, in fact. So you want to talk agents, I want to talk silicon. More specifically, you want to talk agent platforms. What do you got going on?
Well, I think that there's this kind of funny bifurcation going on with agents, right? Where you have the kind of consumer platforms now embracing co-working, which is kind of an agent type, right? This co-work agent or something like that. And people think, oh, I'm going to make this, I'm going to train in quote, an assistant who's going to become like my digital version of myself. And I'm out there, building documents, or I'm out there, managing my email or setting up appointments or whatever. And then you've got these, what I'll call corporate agents, which are things that execute some sort of business process. And what's starting to happen is as these second category agents start to scale, they're becoming very hard to manage. And they're becoming hard to scale, and they start to get kind of, you start to have real differences in quality. So you're starting to see companies go, well, I need to build some sort of platform for them. And what they've come to realize is that the platforms of the past where you're managing applications is all wrong, right? Because agents are more dynamic. Agents require kind of continuous feedback. There's a different kind of, an agent itself is now a user type. So instead of it being an application that's being executed by a user, it's actually a user type or an actor onto itself. So now it's so different that there's this recognition that there needs to be a different kind of platform. And we've seen this kind of moving along over the last couple of years, but I've been watching Salesforce for a while. Salesforce invited me out to their tech event, TDX, this week. And I got to tell you, what they've been able to do is really kind of tell this story about Agentforce as this new agent type of platform very well. But what they've done especially well is really made it clear as what Agentforce is for and what all the rest of the other Salesforce stuff is for, and how it all kind of plays together. It just hangs together really well. Even when you start to look at some of their acquisitions like MuleSoft and Informatica, it's like, wow, this all hangs. This all makes sense to me. And that was really powerful. But the other thing that's been very powerful is how they've kind of really taken, I'm going to call it a little bit more of an evolved approach to developing agents. And I think that's being driven by the fact that they're trying to move from a user-based pricing model to a consumption-based pricing model. Which means they have to be a lot smarter about making sure that customers don't get in trouble and spend way too much money. But I also think there's an element to it where they're recognizing that when they look at their own tool sets, like their sales and service modules or their SCM tools or whatever, they're realizing that there's just so much deterministic and transactional stuff in their systems. Agents really don't get the job done the whole way. There needs to be a good, reliable bridge between probabilistic agent type applications and deterministic ones. And they're doing a really good job there. So, it's kind of funny how I was saying to them yesterday, I was like, it's funny how I walked away from your tech show where I usually am looking at very specific things. And I kind of walked away with this impression of, wow, they actually have a good, it's all hanging together rather well. And that really stuck out with me as it wasn't what I expected to get out of a tech show, right? I expect to usually come back. Here's a very cool set of things that are an enhancement or something or a new product. But this is more like I got a better feel for where they were headed in their strategy. You shouldn't sleep on them. I guess I'd say even if you're not a Salesforce customer, the platform alone is robust enough such that you could build agents without it. In fact, they just launched a new thing called Agentforce Labs, which is kind of a build your own Agentforce. It's kind of like a free sandbox, right? And you could show up and you don't even have to use their tools. I mean, you could use Claude with it. There's Claude plugins for it. And you just go and say, I want to use Claude with this. And so they're actually really making an attempt to kind of, I don't want to say distance themselves from the SaaS business, but they're trying to make an attempt to show yet another viewpoint or perspective on their total business as a way to attract new customers. So it was pretty cool. I was into it.
I think it's a pretty cool. I like that they're doing that. It's interesting to me because, like you talk about Salesforce, Oracle just a couple of weeks ago announced their, they call it their private agent factory, which is a similar kind of like, use this as your kind of where you build and manage all of your agents. And, everybody is going after this market. It makes me wonder, is there going to be a kind of one agent platform to rule them all? Or is it going to be, use your own platform and then there's some kind of Uber platform orchestrator that kind of ties them all together over time? It's so early, but it's such an interesting play too.
Well, and the funny part is there's a huge argument over where orchestration actually happens, right? And to your point is that if you go back to the old days of like control plane logic, right, which is like you see with hardware and with telcos, and like the real kind of old school kind of computer science. The idea is that the orchestrator sits on top of everything, right? This kind of controller of controllers idea, right? But in agents and with LLMs, you could have, some people think that the orchestration should actually sit in the LLM or some specialized LLM. There's other people who are looking at it like, well, I don't like that idea because they're probabilistic. We want something more structured. So they're building an orchestrator onto themselves, which is what you see with like ServiceNow. But then you've got these people who are just building out like Agentforce builders, and IBM has an orchestrator as well for agents. And Microsoft is even doing this with Power. They all have it kind of built out as a wireframe construction tool. And I think there's so they have it as its own thing, but it's really kind of more agent specific than kind of an Uber alles type of thing. So where that ends up, that's the other part of that that's really interesting. And just to kind of cap that thought was, one thing I've been really geeking out on is talking to people about their jobs now that AI is impacting them. And I was talking with one of the heads of product management there this week. And what she said is, all of our steps are the same. We're just executing everything in a different order. And when you think about that, you go, okay, so the work is the same. How you're doing the work is different. And the example she gave me was around Vibe, which she said, I can have my product managers vibe code a prototype and go out and show it to 10 customers and actually get instant feedback versus writing up requirements and then having a UX team build this. And she says, so we're still prototyping, but we're prototyping more rapidly. And we're actually getting more, not only more rapid feedback, but we're actually getting more volume of feedback from the customers by enabling our product managers to go out and build prototypes and MVPs with vibe code tools, bring them back and go, this works, this doesn't, this works. And in fact, the writing of the requirements has become one of the smaller parts of the job because they can actually just document the outputs of their meetings from meeting recordings.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
Or they can document the prototype itself. They can basically be like, write me an architectural spec based on this thing I built over here. So
isn't that interesting, right? So I mean, even your like, if you think back to traditional MRDs, PRDs kind of requirements documents, right?
Yep.
You're coming at it almost backwards in that you're after the fact creating that prioritized, weighted set of requirements that have already been validated. That is fascinating, and it makes perfect sense when you think about it.
Yeah, my entire argument was, and one of the things, if you've worked with me in product management, some people have, they'll tell you that I'm one of the big anti-agile people. Like I always thought agile was BS. And here's why. My reasoning was very simple. Was I felt that spending all your time in Scrum meetings and all your time writing epics and all your time in Jira was taking time away from the customer. Sure. At the end of the day, product management is the interface between the engineering world and the customer world. So I always felt like anytime I worked on an agile related project, I actually spent less time with customers than more. I spent more time in meetings, less time with customers. That was my feeling. Now, I can also tell you almost with shocking regularity how poorly every place I worked on agile did agile. Like agile to me was like back in the day. It was like a really good idea that nobody wanted to execute on. Right. So for me, it was like I always worked at places that didn't do agile well. I always was like, well, this sucks. Waterfall's better because you spend more time with customers, even though it's slower. And now I'm actually finding that I'm starting to see evidence from our clients who are building products with AI are coming back saying, well, actually, this is kind of cool. It's like a little bit of the best of both worlds because we're automating all the crap about agile. We're automating the writing of the epics and the stories and all that stuff. And we're actually now able to build and give more richer customer experiences. We may not spend more time with customers, but the time we're spending is actually better.
Yeah. I will say this too. I feel like in some degrees talking about waterfall and kind of like the product development life cycle, I feel like when we get into more agile methods and even some of the vibe coding stuff, right? A lot of it comes down to how, in fact, you go about how much rigor you apply to what you're doing. So here's a concern, right? When I am in the old days, when I am a product manager and I'm writing a set of requirements for the next big server platform, I spend weeks to months sitting down, looking at the competitive landscape, looking at the market landscape, looking at trends, and I synthesize all of that with some critical thought and put together where I think we need to be with this next generation to be competitive, to be lined up to support the future needs, so on and so forth. The challenge I have, and it was with I saw it with Agile and I see it with Vibe as well, is there's a real danger of falling into these kind of biases, right? I think I know where things need to go. And I go down and I iterate on this kind of bias I have. And even when I bring it out to customers, if I present it as, this is what we're thinking, a lot of customers will give you feedback on what is in front of them, not on how does this align to kind of the larger set of needs I have, but you're showing me something and I'm critiquing what you're showing me. I'm not kind of taking this more holistic view, and that can be dangerous.
The word is discernment, right? And that's
discernment. Yes.
And it's so funny because I actually, you may have experienced this too, but this is the danger of memory with LLMs, right? Like the more the LLM gets to know you, the more it feels like it's trying to be your buddy, right? Like,
oh yeah, yes.
Like it's great for making output. Generative output, it's great because it makes it sound more like you. So there's a value to it. But then when you're trying to do research with it, it's like, well, since you know these 6 things, I'm going to tell you this because I actually think that the more memory and the more context you put into some of these research exercises with an LLM, the more confirmation bias you can actually generate. I actually start to do that already.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I actually try and, it's funny you say that because I try and, I've introduced a lot of diversity into kind of the models I'm using specifically because of that. I want a more hey, you're an idiot kind of feedback instead
Yeah,
of you genius.
you almost
Yeah.
want to research one, like you say, I'm going to use Gemini for research and I'm going to use Claude for writing or whatever, or coding,
Yep.
whatever it is.
Yep.
Otherwise, and you almost like build that Chinese wall between them, because otherwise it's going to be like, well, of course you're smart. You're beautiful.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I just saw I just saw
How
a meme.
insightful.
That's what I was gonna say. I just saw a meme and I'm gonna get it wrong, but the spirit of it was those biggest idiots sitting across the office from you are being validated and told they're geniuses by ChatGPT or by Claude. It's like,
Yeah.
it's so true, and I'm one of them. So yeah. Anyway,
All right.
this is
So
interesting
let's talk about the dirty word that is diversity these days.
Yeah, diversity, silicon diversity, fad or trend. All right. So it's interesting, about 9 years ago, actually, that's not true. You can tell that this is not scripted because I'm kind of going on the fly. About 11 years ago, Google deployed its first TPU internally. It was 2015. They announced it in 2016. 2017, AWS, they earlier had bought Annapurna Labs, deployed Graviton, and fast forward, and we've got Graviton, Cobalt, Maya, Axion, TPU, Trainium, Inferentia. We've got all these custom chips, and you've got companies like Marvell, Broadcom,
Yep.
That are doing custom silicon for MTI for Meta and hyperscalers. And these hyperscalers have gone down the path of creating very specialized silicon that works optimally within their power, performance, cost envelopes. So, and it saves them 4% on price performance per watt or something like that.
Yeah. Data center is the computer bit.
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing, right? An enterprise person looks at that and goes, well, that's kind of stupid. What's 4%? At scale, that's great, right? It saves you a lot of money, right? And as we get into AI, we're seeing more and more. We're seeing custom accelerators. You see Grok that is now part of the NVIDIA disaggregated inference solution.
Yep.
You've got Cerebras doing wafer scale stuff, the size of a dinner plate. That's their chip that's serving up, large scale inference. You see all these kind of custom pieces of silicon coming out and finding very specific roles. And this week, we saw a couple of new additions to the game, right? SiFive, which is a RISC-V based or RISC-V based, depending on how what school of thought you're in, just got, I think it's 400 million in funding to go build they have a $3.5 billion valuation to go build a RISC-V compute platform, CPU platform that is, really going hard after the data center. And then yesterday, big news came out of the folks that founded Nuvia. The new company is called NuvaCore. That's original. But after Nuvia got acquired by Qualcomm, the founder Gerard Williams and his crew, it seems like after their vesting, they kind of parted ways with Qualcomm, and they're starting up their own chip company. These are the folks, by the way, that built all of the IP that led to the M series CPU inside of Apple's MacBooks and really kind of upset the whole laptop space, right? But they're going after data center compute. And it led me to kind of start thinking about, where are we on the silicon diversity, chip diversity, and custom diversity play? Are we just going to kind of go totally fragmented and, you start looking at, racks as just big black boxes or servers as big black boxes, and you're no longer worried about the underlying architectures? Or does underlying architecture still matter? And is this just a kind of part of the AI bubble that we keep hearing about? Or is this kind of really a signal for something that's longer term, right? I think back to my very early days when, digital circuitry started replacing analog circuitry. And the big joke was, those little modular cards that, contained a bunch of what was then a bunch of circuits, was changing the game, right? You didn't need oscopes anymore. You just needed a voltmeter. You needed to be able to trace 5 meters versus 0 meters, right? Is that kind of where we're getting in terms of technology consumption? It's really interesting. My opinion is, I think it sits somewhere in the middle. I don't think we're going to see this total, almost over normalization, if you will, of silicon, to put it in data trends. But I do think you are going to see kind of the layer of abstraction kind of go further and further up the stack, and we aren't going to be thinking about x86 versus ARM versus RISC-V versus something else in the future. But it's really going to be kind of at the server level. And software, whether it's at the model framework level, the model level, the application level, the agent level, is not going to give a rat's what about what the underlying architecture is, because it's all abstracted. That's my view. But
yeah, I think it's kind of I think it's a kind of phase, right? And the reason I'm going to say that is because is more on the investor side of things, right? The reason why these companies are getting money is because of NVIDIA, right? NVIDIA is so big, and the risk reward profile for these investments is massive, right? So you've got these companies now that are, relatively small. They're getting crazy multiples, and I think in this space it's especially interesting because of the IP ramifications, right? So if you plunk down hundreds of millions of dollars to get a chip company up and running, and they come up with something that's going to get us from 10 architectures to 5, that's going to have a huge ROI. So I think there's a speculative investor sentiment here where, hey, look, at the very, I can hedge my investment because these guys are going to generate something of IP that I can sell to somebody else, right? So it's not like software where, especially with software today, where everybody's got the same features in a month, right? This is still pretty specialized stuff. And like I said, it's all like, who's going to be the NVIDIA killer, so to speak, right? The first thing I'm going to say is I don't necessarily think NVIDIA is in danger. I mean, CUDA is it's an abstraction layer is absolutely like, dialed, and it's been around for a long time. It's forever to catch up. But the other part of this is just that. So there's a speculative aspect to it, but there's also, to your point, this aspect of I think there's a disconnect between these companies and the reality of running this stuff in a corporate, a non-hyperscale data center. Even the neo clouds aren't going to be able to support this level of diversity in terms of inventory stocking, in terms of in terms of just being able to run it, in terms of updates, all that stuff. You can't have that many humans doing all this stuff, right? So and different cooling architectures and different requirements on the building, physical building. So I do think that there's going to be this situation where, kind of like networking, where there was a zillion networking companies and then it all kind of collapsed and there was a few left, right? I think it's going to kind of go that way. Will it be more than x86 versus ARM? Yes. Will it be, there's 97 companies still? No, there's going to be a consolidation. No. The answer is going to end up somewhere in between, and there'll probably be 5 or 6 architectures that'll hang, and you'll see a couple of them, And then the other thing I'll say is there's nothing stopping any of these cloud companies from building their own server and putting it out there.
They already do it. it. I mean, AWS,
Super micro box, and Microsoft can call it, it won't be the Surface, it'll be Microsoft Server Surface, right? Or and Google already doing CPUs. So
and when you look at what all of these folks are doing, and I think you're going to see, whether it's Google with TPU, AWS with Trainium, or Microsoft with Maya, I think you're going to see these inference platforms make their way out into the data centers, the on-prem data centers, as applianceized kind of offerings. But I think that's when you look at silicon diversity. I hear what you're saying, but I think when you look at diversity, and I agree that you're going to see a huge kind of like, there's all this craziness, and then it always kind of distills down to a few, right? But I think the way we look at managing hardware today versus 5 years from now is going to change drastically, and there's not going to really be a human element to it anymore. Um,
Well, yeah, if you look
this,
at EDA software and all that other stuff, I mean,
yeah, it's going to be a different game. It's interestingly, SiFive. Um, I always have to emphasize the VE because I want to go to SiFi. Their lead investor, I think their lead investor on that was NVIDIA. So here's what NVIDIA is doing, right? They're going around, and you talk about speculative kind of
they're pulling
investing,
a
right?
Cisco, dude.
They're placing their bets everywhere. And what they want to do is they want to make sure that NVLink, that all of that NVIDIA goodness is considered as a first order design principle as these silicon companies are kind of thinking about building what's next, right? So that NVIDIA stack is persistent across all of these different architectures.
Somebody comes through with a breakthrough, makes it easy to buy NVIDIA can buy that IP. I mean, right. The other thing that I'm interested in seeing is that, if you think about the notion of, at the component level, you're the commoditization versus industry specialization. Components are here, and then you got hardware, then you get kind of horizontal software, then you get to applications, and applications are where you start to say this one's for banking or this one's for Mm-hmm. With the chipsets and the inferencing, I'm waiting to see somebody come out and say, here's the one that's going to bust open the next genetic discoveries, and it's a new stack, and it's not a. I'm wondering something slightly different than what you're wondering, which is somebody going to take the Cisco route and build something that is vertically integrated, applied to a vertical market that could really generate some sort of, we're talking like, breakthrough along the level of curing cancer type of breakthroughs, where some company's going to come along and say, I'm going to invent this stack for my industry. Or if Chase comes along and says, I'm going to invent a stack for derivatives trading or whatever, right? Because you could see somebody come along and basically align. There's enough open source and enough open standards out there now where somebody could build a completely vertically integrated inferencing stack. That's a big use case that's going to attract.
And I think a lot would argue that that's kind of where RISC-V or RISC-V kind of comes into play with the enabling that.
Yeah.
I liken it to like open source hardware, open source silicon, right? And by the way, you see that to some degree already, right? When you look at like defense spending and military kind of equipment, you see very, purpose-driven, function-driven stacks that begin in silicon that is designed specifically for that function. And to what you're saying, I don't know that it's Chase that builds that kind of derivatives trading stack, but it is Chase with a silicon design house that builds that stack, or think about kind of the research hospitals like a Mass General Brigham, right? Kind of working on that breakthrough for cancer research, right? Absolutely. But I think what is happening is you're seeing the barriers to developing that system all kind of come down, and it becomes more of an open playing field. So, and that's the interesting part of AI as well, right? So kind of it can aid in developing that function-specific silicon.
And the other thing you can ultimately get to, your point about NVLink is good, but I mean, it's the same thing with the hyperscalers who are designing their chips. They're just taking the ARM design and designing their chips to fit into their virtualization stack and their networking plane, right? So they're basically tweaking it, so it's, 90% Neoverse, right? And 10% optimization specific to their data centers, right? So that's going to be the mix you're going to see is, I mean, if you think about it, Matt, I did this, right? Like when I started, I was taking, in my old job, I was taking very horizontally oriented componentry and building it out for, very specific edge use cases, not even general purpose edge. I was building it out for factory floor automation, right? And we were able to do that where we could take our old custom hardware that was used in banks and shrink form it with off-the-shelf componentry I got it from like $100,000. I got factor of 10 to 20 difference in price for the same output for a factory floor versus a bank. And, and that had everything to do with, to your point, it was all open source software based, right?
Yep.
And we were able to just go to a vendor who, in the case of Stratus at the time, it was Advantech, and we went to Advantech and we just said, we like that one, but we want you to change. And we didn't even have to change the hardware, right? And then, we took the next step. And this is another thing where companies are going to figure out, like, hey, I can do this much with off the shelf. And then those very same vendors who are supplying you those parts will come back and go, if you do this 10%, this is something I can't sell to everybody, but you could sell it to your customer base. That level of collaboration is real. It's not like these companies are just like taking orders. The design partnerships between these engineering companies is pretty awesome, right? Yep. And so then you start to get from, well, geez, I did this off the shelf stuff. If I do a 10% tweak to a mid plane, I don't even change the chip. I'll change the mid plane, and I can get this, and I can go out and sell that now. And now all of a sudden, I have something that's half the price, but I can still sell it for the same. But I get the same performance. Ergo, I can probably sell it to the customer for a very similar price point and get more margin out of it.
This is where I think
hardware is a margin game, so you have to think about it that way.
This is where I think it's going to get super interesting 5 years from now too. Yeah. And I know we're coming up on time, but I think when you look at kind of, whether that diversity is exponential or kind of more incremental in growth, but it's coming. And understanding that, your typical enterprise out there, take the Chase example, right? What they're doing for kind of high frequency trading, derivative trading, commercial banking, those are different architectures that are running all over the place. I think there's a real opportunity for some company to come along and figure out that overall control plane that says, when this kind of thing, when this type of inference or this type of agent is being spun up or activated, this is where you should direct it. That's where this chip versus that chip, or this type of chip versus that type of chip. Nobody is thinking about that yet, and there is a huge opportunity to kind of be the control plane for that super heterogeneous enterprise data center, whatever you want to call it.
Just to bring it full circle, that's what the agent models are doing. The agent platforms are doing with models already. They're able to determine what model is the best model to run this particular agent request. Right, that's happening already at all the hyperscalers. They're all doing it.
And now bring that down to silicon level, right?
Bring it down to silicon level.
Yeah. It's so fun. Anyway, all right. Hey, listen, we're coming up.
Everybody thought I didn't know hardware, right?
Oh, you don't. Don't worry. You just pretend. Hey, what are you coming up over the next couple of weeks for travel? You got anything going on? Or
I'll be at Google next, so out to Vegas this next week, and then. And I'm going to an Amazon event the week after that, and then I think I see you in Boston, and I'm going to be at IBM Think. Yeah, I'm on the road for the next 4 or 5 weeks.
Right on, man. I'm hunkered down. I'll be taking care of business at home. I think I got Red Hat Summit coming up, and then the conference season for me. The conference season really kind of takes off from there. At Dell Tech World. We've got Broadcom's got an event going on, HPE, Everpure, NetApp, everything kind of hits at once for the next couple of months. So it's going to be fun. We're going to have a lot to talk about over the next few weeks. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yep.
That's for sure. All right, my friend. Great chatting. We didn't get to talk about the Red Sox and their crappy start, or the Celtics and Bruins and their entry into the playoffs and going against some old school rivals, but that's all right. We can cover that on the next. But until then, it was great chatting, man.
Actually, yeah, it was great chatting. And next week I get to meet new Bostonian analyst for the firm. He's going to be in Vegas. Mike Leone.
The man, the myth, the legend.
If you got a Kevin McHale in your office, you're good by me.
What's that?
If you have a Kevin McHale jersey in your office, you're good by me. You're like,
I know, dude. Yeah,
that was hot.
Yeah,
that was Gen X old man hot right there.
Yeah.
If he had Parrish's number, I probably would have sent him a gift or something.
Stop there.
If he was down with the Chief, it would have been even better. I'll take McHale any day.
I love me some Kevin McHale. Love me some Kevin McHale. Anyway, all right, my friend, you have a great couple of weeks, and we will talk on the other side.
All right, bye-bye.
Thanks.